Adrenal insufficiency means living in a body that often reacts with a volume turned up way past what most people consider normal, where a simple stressful conversation or a minor temperature change doesn't just pass by, but leaves a physical footprint that can last for hours or even days. This phenomenon of amplified inflammation is a cornerstone of the patient experience, yet it remains one of the most misunderstood aspects of the condition, largely because it bridges the gap between the endocrine system, the immune system, and the nervous system in ways that aren't always visible on a standard blood test.
It really is a systemic amplification. When we look at the data, particularly from institutions like Johns Hopkins Medicine and the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, we see that cortisol isn't just an energy hormone, it's the body's primary brake system for inflammation. In a body with functioning adrenal glands, cortisol rises and falls dynamically. It's a precision instrument, but with adrenal insufficiency, whether it's primary, like Addison's disease, or secondary and tertiary forms, that precision is replaced by a much blunter tool, oral or injected replacement steroids. Even with the best treatment, we cannot perfectly replicate the moment-to-moment modulation that healthy adrenals provide. This creates a regulatory gap where inflammatory signaling can run virtually unchecked.
That regulatory gap seems to be where the loudness of the symptoms comes from. Many people describe feeling flu-like or physically heavy after what should be a minor stressor. Is the inflammation itself actually more severe in these moments, or is it that the body has lost its ability to dampen the perception of those signals?
It's likely both, and that distinction is crucial. Research in Nature Review's Disease Primers suggests that cortisol helps moderate inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines. When cortisol is low or not responding dynamically, these cytokines can flood the system. They don't just stay at the site of an injury, they influence brain signaling, mood, and pain perception. So, while a person might not have a massive infection, their brain is receiving signals that tell it the body is under a severe inflammatory attack. This leads to that wired but exhausted feeling, or the sensation of being physically overwhelmed by sensory input like loud noises or bright lights.
The sensory part is interesting because it moves the conversation into the nervous system. The article from My Adrenal Life mentions that people often feel like they're stuck in overdrive. If cortisol is the brake and the brake is failing, does the body start leaning on other systems like adrenaline to keep things moving? Is that why we see these adrenaline dumps or the intense shakiness that people report?
Exactly. This is often referred to as a compensatory stress response. When the endocrine system can't provide the necessary cortisol to meet a demand, even a small one, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. It floods the body with adrenaline and noradrenaline. This explains the paradox of feeling completely drained but also having a racing heart, sweating, and internal tremors. It's a survival mechanism. The body is trying to maintain blood pressure and glucose levels using the only tools it has left, but those tools are designed for short bursts, not for long-term management of daily life.
It creates this exhausting cycle where emotional stress becomes indistinguishable from physical stress. If you have a difficult meeting at work, your body isn't just processing feelings, it's engaging in a full-scale physiological event that involves blood sugar fluctuations and inflammatory surges. For someone without adrenal insufficiency, that might result in a bit of fatigue. For someone with it, it can look like a total physical collapse.
And that's why the "just mental" label is so damaging. The American Psychological Association highlights how stress influences muscle tension, immune activity, and heart rate. In a patient with adrenal insufficiency, the barrier between the mind and the body is effectively gone. The brain-body loop is tight. If the brain perceives a threat, even an emotional one, it triggers a demand for cortisol. If that demand isn't met, the inflammatory cytokines we mentioned earlier can cause brain fog, muscle aches, and even migraines. It's a biological reality, not a psychological overreaction.
We also have to consider the complexity of autoimmune overlap. The My Adrenal Life article points out that in the US and Europe, the primary cause of Addison's is autoimmune. It's rarely just the adrenal glands in isolation, right? People often deal with a cluster of issues like Hashimoto's or celiac disease.
That's a major factor in symptom variability. Frontiers in Endocrinology has published research showing that autoimmune primary adrenal insufficiency is often part of a larger picture of immune dysregulation. If you have someone with Addison's who also has autoimmune thyroid disease, their baseline level of systemic inflammation is already higher. When they hit a stressful patch, they aren't starting from zero. They're starting from a place of existing inflammatory strain. This makes their buffer zone for stress much smaller than someone with a single diagnosis.
That unpredictability seems like the hardest part to manage. One day you can walk a mile, the next day you can barely walk to the kitchen. It makes it nearly impossible to prove to others how sick you feel, because the labs might look stable on paper, but the internal experience is wildly different from hour to hour.
It leads to a lot of self-doubt and grief. Many patients describe grieving the person they used to be, someone who could push through exhaustion. But with this condition, pushing through often triggers a crash. The body's inability to recover quickly means that the cost of overexertion is significantly higher. It's why pacing becomes a survival skill. It's not about being lazy or weak, it's about managing a very limited resource of physiological resilience.
When people are in these inflammatory flares, the advice often shifts toward calming the nervous system. We hear about reducing stimulation, dimming the lights, and pacing. It sounds simple, but it's actually a way of signaling to the body that the threat is over so the adrenaline can subside.
That shift from fighting the body to working with it is a profound psychological hurdle. When the body feels like an enemy, reacting to everything with pain or exhaustion, the natural instinct is to push back harder. But in adrenal insufficiency, that extra effort just creates more stress, which demands more cortisol, which isn't there, leading to more adrenaline and more inflammation. It's a feedback loop. By reducing sensory input and practicing gentle self-compassion, you're essentially trying to manually lower the body's alarm state.
It's interesting how this challenges the traditional medical model that often looks at adrenal insufficiency as just a pill-a-day problem. If you take your hydrocortisone or prednisone, you should be fine, right? But these lived experiences suggest that the replacement therapy is only part of the equation. The rest is about navigating this heightened sensitivity to the world.
The science is catching up to the patients. We are seeing more focus on circadian rhythms and the complex interplay of the HPA axis. The Endocrine Society's guidelines are becoming more nuanced, but there is still a gap between clinical markers and the daily experience of systemic inflammation. This is why community spaces like the My Adrenal Life Facebook group are so vital. It's where patients can validate that these invisible symptoms, the temperature sensitivity, the brain fog, the flu-like feeling without a fever, are shared and real.
The article also emphasizes that this isn't about weakness. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Navigating a world that feels louder and more physically demanding requires a high level of mental fortitude. You're constantly calibrating your activity, your stress, and your recovery in a way that healthy people never have to think about.
It's a form of high-stakes management. You are essentially acting as your own backup adrenal gland, making conscious decisions that a healthy body makes subconsciously. Every choice, whether to attend a social event, how to handle a deadline, even what to eat, is filtered through the lens of how will my inflammatory markers react to this. It's a heavy cognitive load.
We should also touch on the different types of AI, because while the experience of amplified inflammation is common, the underlying causes change the context. Someone with secondary adrenal insufficiency, perhaps caused by a pituitary issue, might not have the same autoimmune flares as someone with Addison's, but they still face that same lack of dynamic cortisol response during illness or injury.
Exactly. Whether it's iatrogenic from long-term steroid use or tertiary from hypothalamic issues, the result is a broken stress response system. The body's inability to answer the call for more cortisol when inflammation starts to rise is the common thread. That's why the sensation of being physically brittle is so frequently cited across all types of adrenal insufficiency.
If someone is listening and feeling that frustration of being too sensitive or unpredictable, the takeaway here seems to be one of validation. The science of cytokines and the nervous system shows that these aren't just feelings, they are physiological events. The body is working under a completely different set of rules now.
And understanding those rules is the first step toward better management. It allows for a move away from self-blame. When you realize that your exhaustion after a loud party isn't a character flaw, but a predictable result of sensory-induced inflammatory signaling, you can plan for it. You can build a life that respects those limits without feeling like you're failing.
It's about finding that balance between acknowledging the reality of the condition and not letting the fear of a flare-up dictate every second of life. It's a narrow path to walk, but having a language to explain why you feel the way you do, the vocabulary of inflammation and nervous system regulation, is incredibly empowering.
It really is. The more we look at the research from places like Cleveland Clinic or the APA, the more we see that the endocrine system is the conductor of the body's orchestra. When the conductor is missing or limited, the music gets chaotic. Learning to handle that chaos with patience and evidence-based strategies is the key to navigating the long-term journey of adrenal insufficiency.
The depth of this connection between our hormones and our immune health really highlights how much we still have to learn about chronic illness. It's not just about one organ failing, it's about the entire ecosystem of the body shifting its equilibrium. For those looking to dive even deeper into these topics or to find a community that truly understands this amplified reality, the My Adrenal Life Facebook group offers the full article and a space for discussion. Understanding the why behind the symptoms is a powerful step toward feeling a little less isolated in the experience. If this conversation resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that their physical reactions are both real and scientifically grounded.